Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Fronteras, A Changing America. I'm Jonny Coker. Returning to the show today is a very special guest. She's an activist and archivist and the owner of Casa Camino Real bookstore and also the author of the novel Street of Too Many Stories. It's my honor to introduce the one, the only, Denise Chávez. Denise, thanks so much for being here with us today and for sharing your stories with us.
Thank you, Jonny. It's a great honor to be here on my campus. I'm an alumni. Not only am I a graduate, but I also taught here in the English department for 7 years, actually. So it's great to be back on campus and to feel the energy of this place.
Definitely, and it's always good to have you here, and you've left quite a legacy, with the folks that you've taught with. But I wanted to talk a little bit about your book, A Street of Too Many Stories. In your own words, you were raised by activists and by educators. So how has that evolved with your writing, or how has that influenced your writing throughout the years, especially with the evolution where we are culturally today?
Well, I've been blessed by great ancestors. My mother was a teacher for 42 years, coming from far west Texas. A widow, met my father here, who had just returned from Georgetown University. He grew up here in the Mesquite area, the historical district. My father was helped by Senator Denise Chávez, who I am named after, but he was able, through Senator Chávez's help, to get to Georgetown. Imagine a young man in the 1920s leaving La Vecindad, the neighborhood of Mesquite Street, to go to Georgetown University. My father went to night school, and actually I've written a book about my father. His dream was to be a lawyer, and my book is for young children. It's not been published like many of my things. It's called Chano's Dream, was to become a lawyer. His brother had been killed in World War II, and he was going to be was going to become a lawyer. Well, my father took the mantle, became a lawyer, met my mother here, but we come from educators. My grandmother worked for pioneer settlers and traveled across the U.S., and she learned English, and she was bound and determined that all of her children would go to college, and they all did. They were the first Latino graduates from Sul Ross University in Alpine. And so I come from educators, from people that love to read, that understand what culture was about, which is the heart of our communities. What is our culture, our foodways, our language, our books, our stories? And so the evolution of this collection, and it is a collection of voices. I would call it an opera of voices, or a theatrical piece. It's bound in, not bound, it's given life by voice and characterization, because number one, I graduated from theater here at NMSU, worked with Herschel Zone, and then I went on to the Dallas Theater Center, so my training was theater. And this book is very theatrical because, no quotation marks, voice, character driven, and even the images from the cover, the wedding dress, the piñata, which symbols life, Pasajero the dog, the spirit cat, the black spirit cat waiting, our helpers. I think it would be wonderful to see as a theater piece, but it's informed by the strength of my family in allowing me, giving me the energy to really tell the true and unvarnished stories of our lives, even though my mother said to me once, Denise, don't write about us. But she clarified that by saying to me another time, Just write one, Gone with the Wind. Margaret Mitchell only wrote the one book.
Yeah.
She says, you don't even have to write but one book. Margaret Mitchell, Gone with the Wind. She says, you see our street? There's a lot of stories here. You don't even have to write about the street. Write about our house. Write about this, because that will take the rest of your life. So even though she said, don't write about us, she said, just write one, Gone with the Wind. And I'm still working on that book. But I bless my ancestors for giving me that strength to tell story.
Certainly. And this book, I mean, I'm sure it did take a lot of strength to write. There are a lot of dark themes. And you mentioned, you know, maybe earlier in your career, people would laugh a little more during, you know, reading your books and then find serious notes. And it's kind of flipped in that, you know, this is a very serious book with a few humorous bits. But I mean, how has that evolved in your writing? I mean, there are a lot of really tough subjects in here,
well,
generational trauma. So,
yes.
you know, how difficult is it to write about those types of things?
It's hard. It's very hard. The book centers on 4 families on Encantada Street in Encantada, New Mexico. And we live with that illusionary moniker of the land of enchantment. But you see a street that's furrowed in the middle, that has an ancestral feeling, that moves into the mountains. And the street has a voice in this book. The street remembers the antediluvian days when the dinosaurs wandered through here. It's a book of magical realism in a way, because the spirits come in. You never know when your grandmother's going to look in the window and come and say hi. The ancestors come back. The spirits come back and they look to see how we're doing. And they leave us mementos. It might be a heart-shaped rock. It might be a feather. For me, I know that my mother is nearby when I see white butterflies. Or my older sister, Faride, who passed away, she was a bead artist, creative person. So I'll find a random bead out there in the middle of nowhere. I know my sister comes to say hello. So the street has a life. It remembers. It remembers those late nights, those sad stories, those beautiful moments, the night that we lost our grandmother, the time that we had the piñata for that birthday party. It remembers the food, the spirits. Well, it was hard to write. There's no two ways about it. It took me 7 years. And one of my other books, Face of an Angel, took 7 years. But this book, in those 7 years, it was really actually kind of good that nobody remembered me as a writer. And it was during the pandemic. So what did I do during the pandemic? Write. I have so many manuscripts. I've never stopped writing. Maybe I wasn't publishing at that point, but the distillation of voice and character, and then to be able to find a publisher is very, very difficult. And I found through Maria Martin, NPR, Latino USA, this is Crossing Borders, Building Bridges. Maria interviewed me several months before she died. She was living in Antigua, Guatemala, teaching and educating radio people there. I said, I cannot find a publisher. She said, try Josie Mendez Negrete from Conocimientos Press. Conocimientos is understanding, knowing. And her books were hard-hitting, and I sent my manuscript, and she got it right away. She understood what I was saying, because the book is hard. It's about familial healing. It's about alcoholism. It's about abuse. Mental, spiritual, emotional, physical, spiritual, but it's a book about healing. And I believe that this book can help people. I believe that battered women's shelter, I need to take that book there. I need to go to a group of alcoholics and say, and everybody's alcoholic. I grew up with a family of alcoholics. I attended Al-Anon for many years. My father, had he not had a head injury and was unable to walk, would have continued drinking. And once you become an alcoholic, he had a very traumatic youth. And let's say at about age 15 or 16, he almost drowned. And in a way, he drowned in his alcohol. And so the thing of it is, they say that when a person becomes an alcoholic, you become stunted at that age. My father was still 16, even though he was 85. And so it's my great blessing to have seen trauma up close, because maybe as an artist and a writer, we can help each other.
Mm. And you know, it is a very dense book and it is very dark. How, when you're writing a book like this, or maybe any works, how much do you feel that presence of your ancestors or of those folks that may not still be here? Like, how much inspiration do you draw from them?
Total. I pray over myself all the time. I wept through this book. I cannot tell you how many times I wept at the ending. The ending would get me every time, and I read it. And when you work on something so dense, you move through a sentence and you come to like a speed bump, and it stops you, and then you go back again. You're just doing this constant thing, one sentence, one sentence, one sentence. Is this what I really wanted to say? Well, I was under the mantle of the ancestors of my parents, praying over myself under an image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, smudging all the time, going out to look at the mountains, to center myself with a good meal, or my cats, or my husband. You have to approach a very intense work with a sense of commitment. It becomes like a manda, that word that we have in Spanish. It's like, I need to give thanks, so I'm going to climb a mountain now for the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. That's my manda, that's my goal, that is my consecration of this work, because I'm going to go up and give thanks. It was my manda to finish this book, and there were certain people that I had a responsibility to. Certain voices that I really needed to commit myself to, whether they're neighbors, family, or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's a book of fiction. And I don't think you need to look to find character, because this is a universal book. I remember somebody came up to me, a woman from Japan, and she said, "Miss Chavez, your books are so Japanese." That meant that it was a universal voice. It was, or someone else once came up to me, "You write in the manner of Dickens." That was a great compliment, because Dickens had mirrors. He was theatrical, and he used to act out and walk his characters. And as a theater person, to write in the manner of Dickens is a great compliment. Or to say that the book is Japanese, or whatever it might be, Indian, whatever, because it's the story of the world. It's a universal story.
Mm. And you know, it is like I mentioned, we mentioned these dark themes of alcoholism and abuse. What do you hope that people get out of the book who are reading it? Like, what is the main message that you want people to walk away with, especially speaking of it from that universal perspective, like being a universal story?
Strength, forgiveness, coraje. There's a word in Spanish that's very relevant here. Coraje, C-O-R-A-J-E. Coraje means strength, but it also means rage. And so it depends on how you're going to use the word. Me dio coraje. It made me angry. That's the situation of the world. Me da coraje. How are we going to remedy what's happening now? Our unhoused people. I cannot see one more amputated limb of a child, or the rampant rise of animal abuse, the missing children that are happening now, the violence of me da coraje. But at the same time, I have courage. That's the other, el otro sentido, the other meaning of the words: courage, strength, hope. And the optimum word here is forgiveness. You need to move on from the trauma and to understand that our parents, our ancestors struggled, whether it was racism, low wages, they had struggles that we don't even realize they do. My father, the racism, when you hide your burrito because people make fun of you, you don't have a bread sandwich and a white bread sandwich, and don't speak Spanish because we're in the United States. My father was punished for speaking Spanish in the schools. Mm-hmm. So we have to remember that they had struggles that we don't even know what they are. And so we approach story and the street and the stories of our lives with love and forgiveness, really.
Certainly. And you know, Denise, speaking of that, there was actually an excerpt that I wanted to ask you about. So is it okay if I read one real quick and ask you a question? So in this excerpt, it says, only Anglos and their Mexican-American wives lived on the street, or Mexican-Americans. Most of the children didn't speak Spanish because their parents were American. They wanted their children to grow up with English as their first language. The parents knew that to be Mexican was a hard life, especially in this town. It was close to the border, but it wasn't Mexico. Mexico was another world, another set of problems, other frustrations, other misplaced dreams. This was America, and everything was possible. So, you know, how does that cultural divide and that racism and, you know, how does that compare to what we're seeing today from your perspective?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the same story. It's the same story. You see that same division. When my father was growing up on Mesquite Street, all the wealthy people lived over there by Pioneer Park on the west side of Las Cruces. The poverty-stricken side was on the east side, which was Mesquite, and when he was growing up, he said that that was the very last street in Las Cruces in the 20s. And he used to walk to NMSU. He was a history major, then went on to law, through fields of rabbits. Can you imagine walking from Mesquite to NMSU through fields of rabbit and grass that was high as a man's waist earlier? Well, if you drove on Mesquite Street in that time, in that era, you would have seen our African American brothers and sisters on the other end of North Mesquite. It was like a shanty town in the deep South. And we still see that divide. You see a lot of African American families on Mesquite Street, a lot of Chicanos. Now a lot of people have moved in because of the rents, or maybe the rent is lower, I don't know. Now it's becoming gentrified a little bit, and you have people coming in and wanting to change it. It will never be like Mesilla. One of the restaurant owners said to me, this is going to become Mesilla. No, I don't think so. Because there are people that live here. It is a living and vibrant community with many, many adobe houses still. As a city, we need to preserve a lot of those historical adobes. Irene Oliver Lewis and her sister Sylvia talked about Las Cruces, and I interviewed them for an article I did for Edible New Mexico on neighborhoods of New Mexico, and I talked about Mesquite Street. The Mesquite area is one of the largest populations of adobe buildings in the borderland. And so I think we need to think about cultural preservation. What are the cultural things that we want to preserve? The foodways, the culture. I always write about food. Food is very important to me. It's nourishment. In this book, to me, I hope will be nourishment. You're not alone. Yes, your family was this. Maybe this was the story of your life, but you are not alone because the street holds us. It gives us a meaning in our culture. The mountains, people say to me, well, are those the organs? This cover by Ashgood is very wonderful. People ask me, are those the organs? Well, I say the mountains in the book. They can be the organs if you want. And what street is that? That could be any street coming down, looking at the mountains in our town. And the street is furrowed. It's in disrepair in certain places. But if you look very closely, if you would blow this up, you would see somebody peering out from one of the windows. You might hear a noise from an elderly person in his rented hospital bed. You'd hear a yelp of a dog, or maybe you'd hear the rustling of the wind and the remolino, the dust that swirls in, and then you find that stone that reminds you of your grandfather.
Do you think that, the city of Las Cruces and maybe even NMSU as an extension to that does enough to preserve our cultural heritage or preserve the cultural history of Las Cruces and our surrounding areas?
Well, I think we've done a lot. And I think about that show that I was here last on to talk about Low and Slow. That was a wonderful lowrider exhibit. And Norma Hartel, you did a great job. It was fabulous. I think we can do more. And one of my commitments in my lifetime is a project that I'm working on called Museo de la Gente, Museum of the People, an archival resource center that preserves the history, culture, foodways, music, literature, language of our borderland region. Now, I hope to house this collection, whether it's a letter from Rodolfo Anaya. It's the 50th anniversary of Bless Mi Ultima this year. And Rodolfo Anaya was my mentor, my friend. I have a lot of memorabilia, whether it's art, literature, culture, seashells that he would send me from Mexico. He loved Mexico, and Rudy would write a poem and send me some seashells. Let's preserve that. Let's preserve those old buildings. We lost the Trust building. We lost St. Genevieve's, but it's not lost because maybe it can spur us on to protect. We lost these apartment buildings here just on campus. That was a blow to me. I remember the hut. Some of you might remember, I'm dating myself. The hut was kind of like it was a club. And you would go over there like a beat club, and you listen to poetry and have a drink, a soda or whatever. I don't think you could have alcohol in there, but it was like the Beat Poetry Center of NMSU. Where's the hut? Who remembers the hut? I do, because my folk artist friends used to play folk songs in there. I think we need to really step up and preserve the history, culture of our borderland region, whether it's language, culture, food. We had a workshop on cooking with nopales, the cactus pads. And I remember a woman from Barnes & Noble, she says, nopalitos, nopales, nopalitos. You mean it means something? Yes. A nopal is the food of our people. A tornillo street are those screw bean mesquites, and they make a flour out of the tornillo. It's got a sweet essence. It's a cousin of the mesquite street, the tornillo street, and so it was also medicinal. And so we need to remember the names of our trees, what that plant, what the chamizo is good for, what that building represented, and I want to do that.
I see. And Denise, something that really struck me when I went to see you at the Casa Camino Real bookstore,
yes,
at your bookstore. Yeah, was the sense of community I really felt when we were sitting there and you were talking to all your friends and your husband was there, and I feel like that's something that's been lost on my generation a little bit. Like you mentioned, the hut being a place to go.
The hut was it.
Yeah, a place like that. But
it was a salon in a way.
Yeah.
Well, and the day that you came into the bookstore, it was the day of the book launch. It was wild and woolly. We had a lot of coffee and pan dulce. I love that sort of ambiance.
Yeah, I do too. And like I said, I feel like it maybe that type of thing is lost on my generation. So what is your message to folks in my generation who feel like we've lost some of that connection with each other?
Well, it's not lost because you're speaking of it. Your mandate, your calling is to continue that energy, that commitment to story. By the fact that you invited me here is a commitment to voice and spirit and that energy of community. This is a wonderful program, Fronteras. We're about community, so it's not going to be lost. You need to find your hut and create your own hut, and all of us have those wonderful spaces and creative energies of our life. Find what it is that defines your sense of community and reach out to those people. Whether it's a homeless person in front of the post office. Bobby. Bobby's out. I worry about him. He needs social work. He needs to take a bath, and he's got a puppy that's 13 months old. So I always have cat food because I'm a cat activist and an animal activist. I'm giving Bobby cat food for his little puppy. Who are those people out there? Who are our community? And what can we do to protect those animals, to protect those people, to reach out and create a space that's fun, vibrant, and that accepts everybody. Hey, yeah, come on over, have a cup of coffee. And now that it's so hot, that café de olla is very good cold. So you hit us on a wonderful day.
Yeah, and it was a good day, and I appreciate you having me, and it's good to have you in the studio. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I did want to give you one last chance to plug your book. Where can people find it? Where can they buy it, and how can they read it?
Well, you can come to the bookstore Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, 11 to 5. We sell books online on 8 books, so you can look for our phone and address. Look for Casa Camino Real bookstore. Come and buy books. Buy it from me. I have a lot of copies. I'll sign it for you. We have bookmarks and all kinds of wonderful goodies we can give you. Also order from Conocimientos Press. And if you're a bookstore, Ingram carries it. I know that the book is in the Mesilla Book Center. I don't know if it's in Coas. If it is in Coas, come on now. But it's out there. And come on over and have some iced café de olla, 11 to 5. If you have an extra can of cat food or dog food, bring it over. We'll feed our feral cats. And then maybe I can give Bobby a little bit of dog food instead of cat food. I would say, wake up. Just wake up and look around the world and see the beautiful magnificence of life. And find that place of healing and forgiveness in your own space.
Yeah, well, that is a beautiful sentiment to end on. Denise, I really appreciate you coming on the show, and we hope to have you again sometime in the near future.
Anytime.
Of course. All right, well, that's all for today's episode. Remember, you can stay up to date on the latest local news at krwg.org. So for me and everyone here at KRWG Public Media, I'm Jonny Coker, and we'll see you next time on Fronteras, A Changing America.